clinical psychology. And as Gia mentioned, my program that just came on the market called Language of Desire actually goes into a lot of depth about that. So we're going to do kind of a top-level intro to this here tonight, and then, like she said at the end, we're going to do some questions and answers. So I'd like to welcome you all for taking time out of your busy lives to listen to this. I really appreciate it. And we're going to cover in this little 20-minute presentation, the first thing we're going to talk about is how men are wired differently in their brains as well as their sex drives, and how this wiring that's different from how women are, how this creates some obstacles sometimes in our sex lives that, you might see as being insurmountable. You might not even recognize that there's even an obstacle, but you might notice that you're frustrated or not feeling fulfilled. And so this might clue you in on a few things. And we're going to talk about no more mind reading. And then I'm going to give you an intro into the program. We're going to just touch on that briefly. And then, like Gia said at the end, we'll have time for question and answer. So the first thing we're going to talk about is how men are wired differently. And when I say that, the first thing we're going to talk about is how it kind of goes back to the caveman days. And really the notion of romantic love, that's a relatively new thing. That's something we've kind of created. So way, way, way back, the dawn of time, romantic love wasn't really there in the same way that we know it today. And, there was kind of, it was pretty straightforward as far as men and women. Men, were there to protect the tribe, to, hunt and kill and provide food, and part of their biological programming was to ensure the survival of the human race. And so that meant, planting their seed widely, spreading their seed widely, having sex with, multiple women. I don't believe that monogamy was even around for, in that beginning time either, necessarily. Certainly not in the way that we know it today. And the flip side to that is for women, we had to be super selective about who we chose to mate with. We had to choose somebody that, and this is just using instincts, we had to choose somebody that was going to be a good match. So there's, the concept of pheromones and things like that. Scientists believe those exist for us to instinctively know who is a good mating partner for us. Because our gestational period is longer too, it's 9 months, so we can't be just popping out babies like, cats do or something, so we have to be selective on that turn. And we also, because of just the need for survival, we had to be selective and pick a mate, who could protect us and keep us safe, who would feed us. And this was true from caveman days, up like several hundreds of years, as far as what women were looking for when they decided to have sex and what men were looking for. So there was some big differences there. And that's where I believe the notion of the alpha male came into play. And that sort of evolved, oh wait, I have to tell you one thing first, into some cultural influences that we're going to talk about. But when I switched to this screen, I remembered this important thing. So there's been quite a bit of research, and scientists don't totally agree on this, but enough research and enough studies have been done that show that the female orgasm, the contractions in the uterus when a female has an orgasm, it actually serves to pull the sperm, to draw it up inside of her, which increases the likelihood of conception. And that's an important distinction, because if you go back to the notion that men are biologically programmed to spread their seed and ensure the survival of the human race, it stands to reason that they were also programmed to some degree to please their partner. As we all know, and this is true women and men, I think men should know this, that women don't tend to have an orgasm from just intercourse. There's a whole other set of skills and techniques that need to generally happen for most women. And so there's a strong correlation between men wanting to and needing to spread their seed widely, as well as a component of being wired to please a woman, because pleasing her and giving her an orgasm also, helped with that thing where they needed to, keep the human race alive. So not a lot of people talk about that, but I found that very interesting when I was doing all of my research to write the book. So how this idea of the alpha male has evolved, there's these cultural archetypes, and they're things that we've all grown up with. And so I'm going to talk right here about what men grew up with. And it's the idea that as a man, to be masculine, there's different ways to show that, whether that's by your physical stature, whether that's by your wealth, whether it's by your influence, the type of job you have, how powerful you are. All of these components feed into this idea of the alpha male. Now, not every guy walking the planet is, aiming to be like some muscle-bound guy driving a Porsche with $1 million in the bank. So even the men that aren't, physically representing our ideal of an alpha male, he's still grown up in a society and in a culture that values that, and that tells him, one of the ways to prove your manliness and your worth as a man is by being that leader. And part of that is having women desire you, having women like throw themselves at you, kind of that rock star, sex god thing that guys, aspire to. And again, whether it's something they actively are trying to be, like being a pickup artist and being really slick and stuff, but it's true to some degree even for the men who don't appear to be that way. It's something we've grown up with from media, the movies, music, pretty much everything we see tells us that this is what men should aspire to. So somewhere in his psyche, there's this idea of wanting to be the man who is going to walk in the room and the prettiest woman and all the women are going to turn and look at him and desire him. And that's key, because that's something I'm going to talk about in a few slides, so I want you to remember that. And the flip side to that, women, I can go on and on and on about all of the cultural archetypes and influences that we women face, and I'm going to touch on some of the important ones when it comes to our sexuality here in a moment. But there's definitely the idea that for women, meeting a certain beauty, standard of beauty, that's what is sexy. And so we internalize a lot of that, where if we don't wear a certain size or look a certain way, somehow we equate that with not being able to or not being allowed to be sexy. And so in the program, I break a lot of those myths down, and they're things that we think ourselves, so we might not even realize that we have this idea in our heads that we don't get to be sexy because we don't look like Heidi Klum, because that's not, we don't all have to look like Heidi Klum to have great sex lives. So
no, anyway. And you know what, Felicity, sorry to interrupt you. I thought that was one of the absolute best parts of the reading in your program was exactly what you just talked about, how it breaks down all of those myths, and I think that's very important in terms of self-confidence for women. And
totally.
we've internalized so many myths and so many, there's so much brainwashing, if we want to talk about it plainly, that we internalize this and we believe this to be true when it really actually isn't. And I think that you're going to talk about that a little bit more coming up here. But yeah, that was really one of the best parts for me. I just wanted to tell you that.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, it's, in the program I share a lot of my own personal experiences, because one of the things I do like to point out, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a sex expert, I'm not a stripper or, porn star, anything like that. I'm just a normal woman who had an epiphany when I was kind of at a crossroads, a really emotional crossroads in my relationship. And I decided to just start from scratch, where I'm gonna let go of everything I think I know and all the assumptions I have both about myself as well as my partner. And Michael Fiore, and I love this term, he coined me the Indiana Jones of the male mind.
Right.
Like, I imagine myself with a little hat and like a little, outfit running through. But it was, just giving myself permission to like drop everything I thought I knew and start from scratch and learn what was the truth, and trying to tie it back to facts and science as much as possible.
Right, and that really is an epiphany, isn't it? It just changes your life when you do it. Absolutely.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. So these differences in how men are wired in their sexual brains, they show up in our relationships. And women, I'm not going to expand on this, but I think we all agree. And these are broad generalizations, but they're generalizations because somewhere on the spectrum there's truth to it, whether it's super, super true for you or maybe not so much, but chances are it resonates with you. And the thing with the obstacles is that women tend to need an emotional connection first, and this goes back to, needing to decide, is this man going to keep me safe? Is he going to, plant a good seed that's going to create a great baby? And that doesn't mean that I'm not saying that sex is solely for procreation, because obviously it isn't. But those biological things are still at play especially in our primitive parts of our brain. So women tend to need this emotional connection, an idea for, seeing some type of future before they're going to feel sexy and aroused and actually want to have sex. Whereas men, the flip side, actually need arousal and sex in order to nurture that emotional connection. And so that's where, the whole gender thing, we're sort of at odds with one another, because I think ultimately we all want the same thing for the most part, which is to, be acknowledged, to feel loved, and to enjoy a partner. And that isn't saying that everybody, the be-all, end-all is to get married and be in a monogamous relationship. I'm not saying that. But, humans have a strong need for acknowledgement, love, and physical contact. And so we both, everybody wants the same thing. It's just how we're going about getting there is different. And one of the things that I kind of get in trouble with my girlfriends, when they hear me talk about this stuff, they're like, men, run companies and make more money and all this stuff. And I'm like, okay, that's true, and there's inequality in our world, but what I'm talking about here is our relationships. And if you are a woman, I don't care if you have, an amazing career and you're super progressive and, all these wonderful things that, I tend to be personally, but at the end of the day, if you're a straight woman and you are in love with a man and you want to make your relationship work, there's certain things that we have to try and understand. And I don't think that endeavoring to understand men's point of view when it comes to love and sex and relationships is doing a disservice to women. Because I think when we presume to know and we make assumptions, that's where we're doing a disservice to ourselves.
So I totally agree with you, and I just want to mention that sometimes on LSI what we get is women that say, why do we even care what men want? Well, you should care, and they should care what we want. I mean, how are you not going to care? It's like the same thing as men saying, why should we care what women want? We really should care. Both of us should care. Yeah. And it's really just about bringing forward your best self, arming yourself with the tools that you need and the information to make yourself feel better and more educated, and then bringing yourself forward, your best self forward in your relationship, so that you can you can do your part, basically, so that you can nurture your relationship, and your partner should be doing exactly the same thing. So
absolutely,
yeah.
And that's a big part of what I teach. This, the language of desire is, it's focused on sex, and it's focused on some really fun techniques and dirty talk and all sorts of things like that. But the bigger picture, it extends beyond just the bedroom. And I think, I'm having the idea and the feedback I'm getting, women, they're loving the program, and I'm like, maybe there's an idea here for doing a similar thing for men to help them understand how women are different. But
yes.
Anyhow, that's a different conversation for a different time.
Right.
Okay, so one of the things, this is one of the huge, big assumptions that women tend to make is that we presume that for a man, that sex is physical, that it's touching, you know, the visible parts of his body. And this is part of, you know, goes back to biology. Men, when they're aroused, you can see it, generally speaking. You know, he's going to get an erection. That's a visible proof of his arousal. Whereas women, it's internal. And, you know, when you talk intercourse, too, it's internal for us as well. And so as women, we tend to just look at that one indicator, you know, his physical response to arousal as being the be-all, end-all. But the triggers to his sex drive and the triggers to his arousal are actually mental. And the thing about that, too, that we women, because we're getting all these messages about our value is in how we look. We're told that in so many ways, and we internalize that, too, that we're worth more, we're more valuable if we, you know, fit a certain standard of beauty, right? And so we also presume that his arousal is based on how we look, and only how we look. And, you know, that's not to say men aren't visual creatures. Women are visual creatures, too. Mm-hmm. And men do get attracted to boobs and, you know, long hair, or whatever it is that might be some guy's feet, or whatever the case may be. But there's also a whole other thing that's happening in his mind that he might not even be aware of. And for the most part, women don't really know this. And so the triggers to his sex drive, going back to kind of the caveman thing, it's validating his masculinity and validating his sexual prowess, and which, you know, that's easier to do if you're already in a relationship with somebody. It gets a little bit trickier when you're single and just newly dating. And I'm looking at the questions. I think that's one of the questions coming in, so we'll definitely touch on that. And respect, because, you know, the way he was selected by a woman way back in time was based on his ability to provide and keep her safe. And so that's a strong drive in a man. And again, you know, not to get into a whole discussion about, you know, culture and everything, but things have really shifted in just the last 50 years. And from a legal standpoint as well as a cultural standpoint, 50 years ago, a woman couldn't own her own house. She couldn't have her own credit card. You know, she was sort of viewed as property of her husband, as opposed to now where we have a lot of autonomy and we can decide what type of life we want. Do we want kids or not? Do we want to get married or not? Do we want to have multiple partners? Or, I mean, there's all these different choices that weren't there, you know, 50 years, 100 years ago. And so the dynamic in relationships has really shifted. But those biological ways that we're wired haven't. So I think that's important to understand. And so as men, you know, when we're talking outside the bedroom, you know, women are having careers, we're doing all these wonderful, amazing things. And to some degree, you know, that's why you see a lot of guys that get really, they're not comfortable with the idea of a woman who makes more money than them or who has the same type of career as he does. And I'm talking generationally, and this is changing. But, you know, I know for me, I'm 42 years old, and the men that I've met and dated, you know, over the last 20 years, this was generally true. They kind of wanted a more traditional thing, and that's because that's what they were brought up with, and they were going to be the breadwinner and provide for their family. And so now that there's this, you know, that isn't necessarily the case, that isn't how he feels his sense of masculinity, you know, it's just shifted things a little bit. And I don't think that we women, we've spent a lot of time, you know, furthering ourselves and doing all these things outside of our relationships, which is fantastic. But we kind of forget that we got to, you know, figure out how we relate to one another, you know, and understanding what's important to him. So there's ways, and I know for me personally, I mean, endeavoring to write a book and all these things, it's ambitious. And in my relationship, and part of this is from my own research, is I've figured out how to validate my partner, even though we're pretty much on equal footing when it comes to like careers. So, and it does, even though it's this, all of this sort of extends outside of the bedroom, it shows up in our sex lives. So, you know, it pays to pay attention.
Right. Everything that happens outside of the bedroom actually affects the sex life of the couple anyway, doesn't it?
Yep, for
Yeah,
sure.
absolutely.
And so going back to this idea of assumptions, it sounds like I'm kind of ranking on women, and I'm not. I mean, I love my girls. I love being a woman. I'm very pro women,
Yes.
but I am a woman, and I know, where I was a few years ago in terms of my thinking and what I thought I knew about relationships, and where I've evolved to just from, really from writing the program. Um, so we assume for a guy that sex is physical, but there's a mental component, and we also, because of our influences and how we feel comfortable expressing our sexuality, we sort of expect guys to read our minds. And and guys, they've done a pretty good job. Like you ask most guys, like, what are you going to do for your girlfriend on Valentine's Day? And be like, I'm going to get her flowers and
Mm-hmm.
chocolate and take her to dinner. Like, we've kind of drilled that into their heads that's what romance is. Um, but for women, like if you ask, and Michael Fiore, actually, we were talking about this the other day, and he says, if you ask most women, are you romantic? They'll say, yes, I'm very romantic. I love romance. But then if you ask her, well, what do you do to bring romance into your relationship? She will probably stop and think, I really haven't. I haven't proactively done things to set the mood, because we sort of have been fed this idea that the man is supposed to do all of that.
Right.
And somehow if we're telling him that that's what we want, it cheapens it, or it's not as valuable. We want the big, romantic gestures and the surprise and the sweeping us off our feet. And somehow we've decided that if we let him know exactly what we want, that it's, then he didn't think of it himself, and therefore it's not romantic, and therefore it doesn't count. Um, and, guys aren't necessarily thinking about that kind of stuff. And so it pays in your relationship. If that's something you value, there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, I'm gonna introduce this into my relationship, and I'm gonna let my partner know this is something that I desire. And you can let him know that by your actions, as well as telling him. And so the flip side to this, and this is the more interesting slide, for women, because of all of these influences that we see every day, and it's stuff we've grown up with. This idea that, we're supposed to look good, we're supposed to take care of ourselves, we're supposed to be feminine and alluring and seductive, but not too seductive, because you don't want to cross that line from, flirtation and cute and beautiful to being slutty or aggressive, any of those things. And we get those messages from organized religion. We get those messages from school systems. Like right now at my kids' school, there's this whole debate about dress code, and what is that really teaching women or young girls and boys, that the responsibility for their behavior is based on how a girl is dressed. It's systematic. We can really start paying attention to how women are encouraged to, be sexy, but not too sexy. And what this does is we've repressed a lot of our desires and fantasies, because for a lot of us, we judge ourselves. I mean, human sexuality, when you have a fantasy, and a lot of times fantasies don't even make any sense, and you might see something or read something or hear something and it turns you on, but then when you take a logical step back and you go, oh, I could never do that, like a common one is having sex in public. Well, that sounds really racy and exciting, and ooh, but then you think about it, well, I don't want to be sitting in that restaurant. What if my neighbor is at the same restaurant, or what if I know, the owner of the restaurant, or, you're afraid of getting caught, and all of these things. So you just said, well, I can't live that fantasy out because there's too much risk involved. And that's kind of an easy explanation, and that's, we ignore that that's something that turns us on. But it also, the bigger problem is because we've made these assumptions about men, that it's about our looks He's going to, indicate he's aroused, and he actually is probably wanting sex 24/7. Like, we don't really have to do anything to trigger him to want to have sex. He's just supposed to want to have sex all the time, right? But we don't feel comfortable even examining our own sexuality, let alone expressing it, because we're judging ourselves. We're afraid, even in marriages of, decades, there's still fear of, what if I show him this side to myself that I don't even know if I'm comfortable with? What if he judges me? What if he, thinks I'm slutty or wonders where that came from? And, all of these things that we tell ourselves, and so we repress it and we live with, some people, magically he reads her mind and knows what she wants and it's stellar. But for a lot of people, when you're expecting your partner to read your mind and know what it is that you want, it leads to mediocre results. And our sexuality and our desires and all that, it's fluid. It's, pun, haha, but it changes. One day you might want something really romantic and sweet and tender, and another day, like this slide, it's like you just want something, rough and tumble, and but you're not telling him that. He's just probably going to go with what he thinks he knows works. And there you have it. You have two people who are connecting, but not really connecting. So as women, I think taking that first step and agreeing that we're not going to expect him to read our minds, and we're going to have to do the work to get comfortable enough to actually express what it is that we want. And when you combine that with understanding what his triggers are, his mental triggers, and how you can paint this very vivid, creative sexual experience by tapping into his imagination, the results are like, it's like fireworks. It's so fun to hear the feedback from people when they've kind of put all these components together. And so when it comes back to the mind reading too, it's validating him, and this is validating both in the bedroom as well as outside. What he does, if you're in a long-term relationship, what he's doing to support your family or your household, or, and I go through like lists and lists of things that you can pick out, so they're genuine compliments, and they might be things that you have taken for granted, you appreciate, but you haven't told him lately that you appreciate. Like, I really appreciate you checked the oil in my car and put a cord in because it was low. And it seems silly, but I appreciate you mow the lawn because I don't like to do yard work.
We forget to do that after a long time. If you've been in, if you've been in it long term, it all just kind of becomes a given, and you forget to do it, and you should for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And how that it's funny how it ties into your sex life. So when you're appreciating him outside of the bedroom as well as inside the bedroom, he feels good. You're making him feel amazing. And he's inspired to then want to give that back to you, and appreciate you and please you. So it's huge, and it seems so obvious. But I mean, even in relationships, it happens over time, but in relationships that are shorter term, it can happen. Mm-hmm. And, when you're talking about somebody who's single and dating, there is that fine line. Like, you don't want to be too over-eager and pouring it on like, oh, I just love this about you, and I love this about you, and this is really great, and you have pretty eyes. Like, you don't want to be like that, because that's kind of creepy and weird. But there are ways that you can infuse your natural appreciation for this man. Like, why do you even want to date him? Is it his passion for his career? Is it that he makes time to be a great dad and spend time with his kids? Is it the work he does in the community, if he does volunteer work? What are the things that you value, and why you've chosen him to be the man you want to date and get to know better? So it works even if you aren't already sleeping with somebody. And then again, it's learning to communicate your needs and desires. And the first step to that is understanding your needs and desires and truly what turns you on, and not being afraid of what you might discover. And then the biggie, and we kind of touched on this a little bit ago, is the idea that, seeking to understand, letting go of your assumptions about men and women and you and your partner, you know, letting that go and just approaching your relationship, whether it's your sex life or things outside of it, approaching it from, I want to understand what's true for you. I want to understand how you're feeling. I want to understand what you need and what you want. And when you do that, like I said, it's reciprocated. And it ends up, you know, just strengthening your relationship overall, both the emotional intimacy as well as the physical intimacy. And I think at the end of the day, you know, that's what we want. So
that's what everybody wants. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. It's the intimacy, understanding each other, feeling appreciated, all of that stuff.
Mm-hmm. And so we have to be willing to take that first step. And I know, like I mentioned, you know, I get in trouble with my girlfriends and we talk about this, and they'll like, but this, you know, this program you wrote, it's all about us having to do the work, and we have to figure it out, and we have to be the ones to initiate all the stuff. And I'm like, well, yeah, I mean, here's your choice. You can stay where you're at, you know, resentful, frustrated, unfulfilled, knowing that, you know, what you want, but you know you're not quite there yet, and you're expecting, you know, magically it's just going to happen. Or you can make yourself a little bit vulnerable, let go of those resentments, and just try this and see what happens. So,
right.
you know, I think the proof is in the pudding. When people have like, oh, well, fine, I'm going to try it just to prove you wrong. My friends have, you know, tried these things, and they're like, oh my God, this is so amazing. And it might sound like it's work, you know, at the beginning, but really it's not, and it's so much fun. So to talk just a little bit about the nitty-gritty of what language of desire is. Initially, when we were thinking about this, one of the things as far as marketing was, well, maybe it could be really focusing on talking dirty, because that's something we know that men really enjoy, and it's something that a lot of women aren't comfortable with. But it evolved, and it evolved from my own personal experience. I had to be willing to put it all out there, and I do. I share a lot of stuff that's happened to me. It's like, some of it's really funny, and some of it's, you know, it's like, oh, but like, I hope my mom, you know, doesn't buy it and read the whole entire thing. But anyhow, what I cover, the foundation of the program, like I mentioned, is really empowering you as a woman to get in touch with your own brand of sexiness. And it doesn't have to be what you see on TV or what you think you're supposed to be. It's really getting to that level of understanding yourself. And I tailor everything in the program. I mean, it goes from romantic to raunchy. I mean, I will preface that. I mean, there's some pretty explicit language in it. But that's just to show you the spectrum. You don't have to, you know, talk a certain way in order to achieve these results. You don't have to try things that you're not comfortable with. And that's a big piece of it, is learning your own boundaries. And then if you get to the point where, as you move through the program, so the first step is understanding yourself. The second step is where I teach a lot more. I go way more in depth about the brain chemistry and men's sex drives, and there's tools for you to start to uncover what's true for your partner, because this presentation is, you know, obviously more on the broad generalizations, but in the program you learn what's true for your specific guy, and that's where a lot of the value really is. And then you move from that into these really fun techniques. And it really is to bring play and fun back to your sex life. And it's super creative. And they teach you how to, like, let's say he has a fantasy. You've gotten to that place where you're now discussing this stuff. And he says, oh, this idea really turns me on. And it's like some of you are going, like, no, I can't. Like, it's not, it's crossing a boundary for me. I can't do that. And so I don't say, oh, no, you have to keep him happy. That's a bunch of bull. It's, okay, so this is what you want to experience. Here's where I'm at. How can we figure out? And it's tapping into his imagination, tapping into the five senses. A lot of it is sensuality, visual cues, and other triggers that you can use that can recreate these, you know, really in-depth fantasies in a way that's still honoring your boundaries, and you know, you're both having fun at the same time. Because a lot of the other programs that are out there, honestly, they're not, I don't know, they're not coming from that standpoint of coaching women to be empowered in having their own boundaries. But at the same time, you know, understanding where you might push it a little bit, and that's part of that, I think, is the thrill of having a really exciting sex life is pushing yourself right to the edge, and then you might discover, oh my gosh, this is really fun, and I want to try it again, or, so really that's the program in a nutshell.
Yeah, and it's really, really fantastic. And like I said, that's exactly what I loved about it, is just that it's empowering. It's exactly what you said about, the other programs. I'll say it flatly. It's just, it's not this, you have to do this in order to get him excited. It's not about that. You have to have everybody has their own boundaries. And, you have to just know yourself and know where you need to stop, and coming somewhere in the middle, so that, you do have an exciting sex life with your partner, so that you're both good with it. So that's what I really love. Yeah, I really, really loved it, Felicity. I thought it was really great. So, and actually, one of our questions was kind of about that, actually. Do you want to go into the questions now?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Yeah, okay. So I'm sorry, there are so many questions here, just I need to find it. Okay. So here it says, I'm way too self-conscious to dirty talk. Whenever I've tried, I just feel like I'm being someone other than myself. How can I get more comfortable with it?
That is a great question, and that's actually true it was true for me at one point in time. And I thought I was pretty good, like with the texting and stuff. And then, and it's in the video where I share this really awkward experience I had, and I'm like, I was kind of like a deer in headlights. And so, again, the difference with this program is there's a lot of coaching, and I give you exercises where you actually practice. And some of it you're going to feel ridiculous when you're doing it.
Right.
But it's, it's sort of getting comfortable with saying these different words, because you can read them, and you might have a little like, ooh, that's a little naughty. And it's different to actually get it out of your mouth and say it.
Right.
And so I kind of work you in baby steps of taking advantage of technology. That's key. And working you towards being able to face-to-face say things. And again, it doesn't have to be explicit to be sexy. There's, I have a whole lesson on innuendo and how do you trigger things. In fact, there's a technique called Pavlov's erection, where I share a story, the naughty word, the totally explicit naughty word that I could say to my boyfriend to make him it was funny. I tortured him with it. But the word was pillow. Pillow.
Pillow.
That doesn't mean anything sexual to any of you listening to this, but I explain in the program how this came to be this very highly charged word. Mm-hmm. And so there's, to answer the question, there's all sorts of ways. So it doesn't have to just be what you already think dirty talk is.
Right. Okay, that's really great. There was another question that I think that you saw that you wanted to address. Do you know which one it is?
It was the one about what do men think if you sleep with them on the first date?
Oh, yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. So, yes, so that's actually the entire question. What do men think of women that sleep with them on the first date? Exactly.
Yeah. And, the answer is it depends on the guy.
Right.
Michael Fiore says this a lot, and it's true, that sleeping with somebody, it's not going to make him fall in love with you. It'll probably just enhance the feeling that was already there. Mm-hmm. So if he was already falling in love with you, then it definitely could, amplify that. But if he's like, no, she's good for tonight, mm-hmm. Then, it's not going to really change his mind. And so the trick is, and this is what I, tell women when I hear this question and they don't know, is, the longer you know somebody before you're physically intimate, the more chance that you have to develop that emotional connection, so that, after you sleep together, you're going to still talk to him, the next day or the day after.
Right.
Because I think that's the big fear is, if I give it up too soon, then he's going to think of me as being slutty, and he's not going to want me, and he's going to dump me. And the truth is, I know people who a one-night stand turned into a long-term relationship. Mm-hmm. Personally, the man I married and had 2 kids with, we slept together on our second date. So, there's no magic timeline that's going to guarantee. But what I tell women is just use this litmus test. If you are deciding, and I don't think there's anything wrong with being empowered in your sexuality when you're dating, to say, you know what, I want to have sex with this person.
Mm-hmm.
But before you do that, know that you can't use sex to manipulate an end result. Sleeping with him doesn't guarantee you anything. And so you have to ask yourself, in this moment, right here, right now, if I decide to, go with how I'm feeling physically and fall into bed on the first date, am I okay with never hearing from him again?
Right.
And if the answer is no, and you're going to feel like you were taken advantage of, or you were used, or he was, sugarcoating things and talking about a future, because really you don't know if there's a future there. Why would you even know after a first date that you want a future with somebody? You don't know them. And so that's the litmus test. If you sleep with them, are you okay with, is this a choice I'm making because I want this, rather than I'm doing this because I hope he's going to become my boyfriend? Like, totally different mindset.
Right.
And a guy isn't, some guys might go, God, if she did that with me on the first date, she must do it with everybody. But not every guy is going to think that. You just don't know.
That's
so the first date, you don't know each other. And really, the sex tends to get better the more you do know somebody. When you have an idea of what they're interested in, you already have some emotional intimacy building, because then the trust factor is a little bit deeper already, and it's not to say that you can't have an amazing one-night stand that's totally mind-blowing either. So
That's a really good answer. It was a very good answer. All right, so I'm going to go on to the next question because we have quite a few and we don't have very much time left. So the next one is, I am a 57-year young woman that is on fire. I know, right? All I hear from my women friends is that the men our age and younger can't seem to get it up or keep it up. Diabetes, drinking, high blood pressure, depression, etc. What is happening?
Well, interestingly enough, in one of the bonus programs that's available, I spend some time talking about erectile dysfunction. And, again, going back to the notion that, women, we equate his erection with being aroused and being turned on and desiring us. And, it happens to every guy at some point in time. He's going to desperately want to have sex, and his body is not going to cooperate. And the worst thing that you can do in that moment is take it personally, or be critical. Because can you imagine, like, for women, we don't, like, our bodies, I mean, obviously it's way better when we're turned on, but we know that, like, sometimes, like, whether it's a hormonal imbalance, it could be a diet-related thing, sometimes medication interferes with our ability to, our self-lubricating function. That doesn't mean we're not turned on. And for us, we can still have sex because we can just grab some lube and we can fix the problem right then and there and be ready to go. And so, again, from that standpoint of seeking to understand, just imagine for a moment how frustrating and how vulnerable he must feel if he's not able to get it up. And so that's where being creative comes into play, where there's all sorts of other ways that you can be sexual that don't involve intercourse. Like, most of us, when we hear the word sex, we think it means intercourse. But there's so many other things on the menu that you can do that are wonderful and that feel good. And, having a conversation and saying, okay, this I want to be able to have intercourse with you. I pretty much guarantee he wants to do it too. So you talk about it. And, right now we live in a time where there's the little blue pill and there's other, medications that are possible, that make it possible for him to, be able to perform sexually. Because when it is like a chronic illness or some other, health thing, it can totally affect his ability to have an erection, but it doesn't affect his desire for you and how attracted he is to you.
Right, exactly. Okay. All right, that's great. Let's go to the next one, the next question. It is, okay, So my boyfriend of 6 years, I got sex on the mind. Yeah, go figure. So my boyfriend of 6 years and I have different amounts of sexual desire. I am 49, a 49-year-old woman, and he is 52. His desire level is much lower than mine. It wasn't like this in the beginning. At first, we matched each other. What in the world can I do to satisfy myself sexually and entice him or meet him halfway?
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really good question, and not to sound like like a used car salesperson, but
Mm-hmm.
by the program. Because actually, I think it goes back to, you could ask yourself, are there assumptions that I'm making about, you know, his, like, he should want to have sex like all the time,
Right.
but he's showing you, his libido has shifted, and again, that could be, we naturally have ebbs and flows to our libido and our sex drive, um, and so there could be that at play. There could also, like you said, Gia, that, what shows up in our sex lives can be a reflection of the relationship as a whole. So
Right.
are there any, frustrations or resentments or other things happening that need to be talked about, honestly? But, sometimes it's, and going back to the brain chemistry thing, which is a little bit different than men's sexual psychology, because we all have brains, and our brains tend to respond the same way. So I talk about this a lot, where the chemical dopamine, it's the pleasure chemical, and there's all sorts of little easy ways that you can trigger dopamine. So what happens over time is, if sex becomes routine, we don't get that big flood of dopamine. And then when we don't get the big flood of dopamine, the secondary hormone that comes into place is the oxytocin. And women tend to have more oxytocin in their systems than men do, but men have it. And so less dopamine, then there's less oxytocin, and then that means both people's libido tends to get diminished. Now for women, if you're perimenopausal or menopausal, you might see a really big high surge in your sex drive, which is normal. A lot of women experience that, and like, our question before, I'm a 57-year-old young woman on fire. Like, that's awesome. I love hearing that. So it could be just a difference in, hormone levels due to your age and what's happening in your bodies at the time, but there are ways that you can introduce novelty, which is something new, and surprise. So something you could do that's out of the ordinary, if you're not already doing this, send them a text in the middle of the day, like totally out of the blue, and just say, I'm thinking about, or I can't stop thinking about, ... And they'll probably think you're going to say, what, I need to get some milk on the way home or something, really like boring like that. And you say either, how hot you looked this morning getting out of the shower, or you bring up something from the past, like that time, we were so hot for each other and we couldn't wait to get home and we did it in the car. Like something, that is going to let him know you're thinking about him in a really sexual way and you're turned on by him and you desire him. Just that little simple thing will cause a jolt in your relationship. And so that's a really easy place to start.
Right. Okay, that's awesome. I think we have a time for a couple more questions. So I'll just get right to the next one. So, this is a really good one, Felicity. I'm a single mom, and I want to get back to dating, but I don't feel sexy right now. I feel mostly tired and overwhelmed with everything I have to do each day. Any advice for getting my mojo back?
Yeah. That's a tough one. And personally, I've actually been in that experience, in that situation, where, just the overwhelming amount of things that I needed to do in any given day, especially when my kids were younger and after my marriage kind of fell apart and I was trying to make my way, managing them, managing my career, keeping a household running without the benefit of, having a partner that was here every day. My father of my kids is amazing, by the way. We have an amazing relationship. So when I say single mom, I kind of feel bad because, he's very much in the picture. However, I can definitely relate to that, feeling just not sexy because I'm just freaking tired. And it's one of those things you kind of have to decide, like, you're going to get back up on that pony. And even if you're not having sex, like if you are single and you're not even dating yet. Simple things like I made a commitment to myself that and I actually had a period of my life where I intentionally was celibate for 2.5 years. And I made a commitment to myself. I'm doing this because I had, I wanted to kind of break some old patterns in my relationships. And I said, I'm going to shave my legs every single day. And I'm going to wear cute panties every single day. Even if I'm wearing ugly sweats and I have no makeup on, I'm still going to do things that I know, nobody else knows, but I know that if, Brad Pitt were to walk through the door, right, that I'd be ready to go. And it was a mindset thing. And so those are some simple ways in making that decision to jump back into dating when you're a single mom. I mean, there's a lot of things to consider, but that first step of starting to feel sexy again, those are things you can do without, it's not reliant on attention from a man to feel sexy. Do things that you enjoy. And actually one of the bonus programs that's being offered with Language of Desire is called the Sensual Tsunami. And there's it goes into incredible amounts of detail about being sensual, which is something totally different than being sexual. And it's doing things that make you feel good and celebrating all the things that there are to enjoy in life. And it's so highly correlated to our sex lives and our sex drives and how we feel about ourselves.
Yes, very much so. And taking care of yourself and just doing exactly what you described before, just shaving your legs every day, putting on nice underwear, lingerie, wearing it under your everyday clothes, doing things for yourself that you're doing makes you feel completely different. And so when you're taking care of yourself, that's what's making you feel good about yourself and sexier in the whole process. So it's really important, definitely. All right.
I'm
sorry. No, but it's not, though. Yeah, it's not.
It makes such a huge difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so let me just give you another question here. This is an interesting question, actually. Is it true that women are more likely to cheat because of our primal need to find the perfect mate?
Ooh.
Very interesting.
That is a very interesting question. In fact, I actually just wrote an article on digital romance about if you could cheat-proof your relationship. And statistically, the numbers, in terms of is it more men that are cheating versus women, it's actually quite even. When you look at the people who are willing to admit, anyways, that they've been unfaithful. But I think the drive for that is different. With men, a lot of times it's because they don't feel respected and validated at home, and the thrill of a new woman throwing herself at him sexually, that can be a huge trigger for a man to want to cheat. For women, a lot of times it's not getting that emotional connection. And again, it could be also a sexual connection. If you are in a relationship where your sex life is mediocre because maybe he's just not a super amazing lover and you haven't been brave enough to say exactly what it is that you want. And so sometimes people think it's easier to seek that outside of the relationship. And I'll tell you, it's way easier to find somebody to have amazing sex with than it is to find somebody you want to build a life with.
Absolutely.
And so sometimes it's, that the thrill of getting caught, the thrill of doing something naughty, the thrill of somebody new, that all of that, it's dopamine, firing off like crazy. And so you get in this, you feel good, even though you probably feel horrible about the fact that if you're married, you're breaking a vow and you're, deceiving your partner and all of this stuff. But there's this flood of feel-good chemicals happening at the same time that it's almost like you get addicted to it. But going back to the original question, I don't know. I mean, I guess it depends on the age of the woman. If you're past childbearing age, the baby shop's closed down. Obviously, that's not going to be a reason, maybe possibly subconsciously, but, I kind of don't know. and you know, and not every woman wants to have kids either.
Right.
So I think, you know, it isn't that these things that are wired in our brains are so dominant that we don't have control. I mean, we have free will. So,
Yes,
you know,
exactly.
but that's a really interesting question. I actually want to maybe do a little bit of research on that and see if I can, you know, if anyone's, you know, made that connection. I don't know. I haven't heard that, though, in everything that I've read
Right,
and looked
right,
up and people I've talked to. So it's a
right.
great question, though.
Yes, it was. It actually was. So we've actually wrapped up our hour here, which kind of stinks because I'm having a really great time.
Oh, yeah, we'll have
But
to do this again.
I think we will. I think we will. And, you know, it's so wonderful. I think that, you know, we didn't get to all of your questions. I'm so sorry about that. And I think that if we got to all of them, we'd be here for the next 2 hours for sure. And thank you so much, everybody, for submitting the questions. They were really, really great. But we unfortunately don't have any more time, so we're going to have to shut it down. And thank you so much, Felicity, first of all, for being here with us. It was so great of you to be here, and it was just so amazingly informative and fun. Thank you.
You're welcome. This was a lot of fun. I love seeing the questions. Would it be possible, I mean, if people wanted to ask the questions on the Facebook page and we
Yes,
could
absolutely.
in there?
Absolutely, yes. So if you'd like your questions answered, then please just inbox me on LSI on the Facebook page, and I'll definitely get those questions over to Felicity, and we'll get them answered for you for sure. And yeah, and anything else that you want to ask, if you want to give us your feedback, which is so, so important, please inbox me or email me. You've got my email on the email that you actually got for this webinar. So either way is absolutely fine. Your feedback's really important to us because we want to be able to give you so many more things of great value that will help you. So yes, please do, please do. And thank you so much, everyone, for showing up, being here. It's really been a pleasure, and I hope that we can do this again sometime. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
I was like, woo!
I know. And I really just have to say that I really did love your program. I know I've said this so many times over and over again, but you know, when I'm excited about something, I really am excited about it because I don't get excited about a lot of things. I mean, there's just so much junk out there, and I loved Language of Desire. So good for you. Congratulations on writing a really phenomenal program. And I think, yeah, I think everybody will enjoy it. So so that's wonderful. And if any of you are interested in the program, just so you know, the links are up in the chat box there. There's a video version, and then there's a letter version that you can just read. But we've also got the links on our website, ilovemylsi.com, which I'm sure all of you are familiar with. And I actually published one of Felicity's articles today on the Facebook page, so you can take a look there as well. Yeah, the article that I posted today was about his erogenous zone. Hello. Yeah. yes. It was a good article too. Yes, exactly. It's not what you think. It's not what people would normally think. But that's what the great thing is about. The great thing is about this whole program is that it shatters a lot of myths, and it really gets down to what seduction and desire and intimacy is all about. And I think a lot of people are misguided, and not to their fault, because we get a lot of messages that are really quite wrong. So so it was wonderful. Yeah, it was wonderful. So okay, I'm going to wrap it up here. Thank you, everyone, again for coming, and thank you again, Felicity, for being here with us. It was wonderful to have you here.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Have a great night, everybody, and see you back on LSI. And yes, don't forget to go and visit Felicity on her Facebook page as well. Yeah, it's just under your name, I think, Felicity, right? Felicity Keys?
It's actually facebook.com/askfelicity.
Ask Felicity. Great. Okay, that's wonderful. All right. Have a wonderful night, everyone. Thank you again.